Hey everyone, welcome to the podcast. Welcome back and welcome to 2026. We're actually in February now at the time I'm recording this, but wow, 2025 felt like a year for sure. And I know many of you feel this way. Clients in my programs and containers and people in my audience are all like, wow, what the hell was 2025? And I can put myself in that camp too, because it really does feel like, 2025 was it was that universal 9 year. So for those of you who follow or are interested in numerology, we know that 2025 broke down to a number 9, and likewise 2026 breaks down to a number 1. So we essentially have left behind this year that was really about endings and shedding, which is why the glyph of the wood snake is so appropriate, right, for 2025. It's that kind of that shedding energy, and what we're entering into now is this universal 1, new beginnings, new momentum, freshness, okay, spark, momentum, fire. And for those of you who are or are into Chinese astrology, we're into the fire horse. Okay, so we're entering into the year of the fire horse very soon, actually. So my goodness, I just kind of wanted to sort of make a little space for that at the start of this podcast, because many of you know, and if you don't, I've relocated back to Australia, which is where I was born. I lived here until I was 26 years old, and then I packed up all of my bags and moved to London in the UK, which is where I lived for 18 years. So it was a huge, huge, huge year for me. 2025, and really even the end of 2024, was all about planning and making preparations for this move, which I completed in July last year. So I've been back in Australia for about 6 months or so now. Finally, just starting to feel like I've kind of settled. It has been a bit of a rough 6 months, to be honest. It's felt like a real shedding for me. I can so relate to this because there's been so much grief that's come up for me in the leaving behind of a land which was my ancestral home. Although I was born in Australia, really, my grandparents and my father were born in the UK. And so it's always been a land that will have a very important place in my heart and in my soul. It's somewhere, obviously, I'll be returning to very frequently. I have very, very good friends there and soul family there. But it's time, it was time for a new beginning for me. And what better time than to start ushering in that new beginning than in the universal 1 and the year of the fire horse. And so I just wanted to share that little update with some of you who may not be familiar with that. And also just to sort of send you love and blessings and well wishes as you start your universal 1 year 2, whatever that looks like for you, okay? And so really today's podcast, it's kind of along the same lines, all right, as this sort of fresh start, fresh momentum. And part of that fresh start and fresh momentum for me, and what feels like a really important part of my journey personally, is to share a little bit of something that feels quite different, okay? To share something that feels a little different, that I still kind of feel like I'm stumbling over the words for a little, which I'm going to talk about in a moment too, but feels really important. Because talking about the idea that coaching, in particular depth coaching, is a spiritual invitation is something I haven't really named that directly before, okay? And I talk a lot about psychospirituality, I talk a lot about depth psychology, I talk a lot about consciousness and purpose and growth and all of those things. But something very interesting has occurred to me over probably the last couple of weeks, month in particular. And it's come through conversations that I've had with my partner, with clients as well, which is all of this really just about spirituality? I say just about spirituality, but you know what I mean. It's like, is this really just a spiritual invitation that you're offering people through some of your programs and through your work? And really, is that what this is about? And it was through that conversation that it just really got me thinking, because I'm like, I've never really spoken about this before. I've never spoken about how actually I believe that what coaching, in particular depth coaching, is becoming is really a spiritual career. Okay. And it's kind of been in the recesses of my mind, as I said, for a little while now. It's always been something that I've spoken about, but maybe in a less direct way. And that's not because I've been trying to skirt around or hide things or make it seem like it's something it's not. It's only just because it's crystallizing with me. So maybe I'm a little slow on the uptake, but it feels right for me to start introducing this work to you as a spiritual invitation, because I believe, and this is what I'm going to get into today through this podcast, there is a very, very unique set of circumstances that are coming together in the world at the moment, at the world at large, but also within the industry. And also what I'm noticing in terms of my client work and my clients' client work that's starting to point to this. So I want to very imperfectly today talk a little bit more about this topic. Because one thing I know, when I say imperfectly and that I'm struggling to find some of the words and things aren't fully crystallized and not entirely clear just yet, what I didn't want is for that to hold me back either. And one thing that I will say about myself, and for those of you who have worked with me at some point over the last 12 years know that I'm a big believer that clarity comes through speaking anyway. Clarity comes through doing. Clarity comes through that living alchemy, through living your message and speaking it. Not through endless procrastination, not through endless journaling. Oh, I need to sit with this podcast outline for another few more hours before it feels like it's really dropped in. No, I know and I trust myself, and this is something that I would share with you, is to trust yourself enough to know that the clarity in the message will drop in as you speak it. And even if it comes through imperfectly or through jumbled words, please let this just be a little lesson for you to say it's okay, that you can always refine and share your words a little differently if they don't come out right or whatever. Who cares? So I want to encourage all of you in the spirit of the fire horse, okay, and in the spirit of momentum to just do things a little imperfectly. And so I wanted this podcast episode today to be a little micro lesson in that, all right? So hopefully that's just kind of set us up for what today's show is all about, which is depth coaching and why it really is a spiritual invitation. And I've been sitting with this topic for some time now. As I said, I've literally got pages and pages and pages of notes here, and some of the ideas I want to share with you. But I think what would be really valuable, just to sort of begin with in part one, is to just give a little bit of backstory, okay? Because part of how I like to work, I'm a puzzle solver, right? I'm an alchemist as well. I take raw material, I look at things, I look at patterns, I look at all of these sort of these bigger things, these little things, and I pull them together, right? And I start to sort of synthesize and hopefully spin some kind of gold out of those things. All right. I say that, but it's like, let's see how this goes. But I thought we'd start with a little backstory and some kind of discussion around what's happening on the world stage at the moment, what's happening in the coaching industry, and why I believe all of these kind of things coming together, all of these factors are starting to lead to this very urgent invitation that I believe some, not all, but some of us are being asked to accept at the moment. So backstory, for those of you who don't know, I've been running my coaching business now for over 12 years, which is a long time when it comes to this industry. Before that, I worked for 15 years in the corporate world. I have a background in psychology. I am a registered psychologist. I did all of my 6 years of training and did all of the things, okay? And what I've noticed through not just kind of all of my professional experience, but also sort of through my personal and spiritual journey that's kind of run alongside of that, is that there is this thing that's really important to me. And I've struggled sometimes to name what it is exactly. And this thing that's really important to me is helping people. Even when I think back to certainly when I was working with psychology, but then even in my corporate career, and then even early in my coaching business, when I was focusing more on clarity and business support and marketing, the thing that's always meant so much to me is helping people reconnect with this sense of purpose. Okay. Regardless of their background, where they've come from, what they've come through, but it's to make contact with this sense of purpose in their lives. And in order to do that, what that really means is it's about helping people find their way back to their true self. Okay? Finding their way back to the true self, shaking off the weight of conditioning, all of the trauma, the expectations, and all of the things, kind of like I was saying around that alchemy, right? Taking all of these conditions and traumas and couldas and shouldas and wouldas and all of the things that we're just drenched in as humans, and taking all of that, stripping it back, and alchemizing it to become the true self. Okay. And when you can start to bring your true self, forget about your business for a minute, but when you can start to just bring your true self to your life, to your relationships, things start to drastically change. When we're no longer performing a role, when we're no longer feeling shackled by the conditioning or through the wounds and the traumas that have held us back, that's where real enlightenment is. That's where real peace is. Bring that to your business or to your career, and I mean, sky's the limit. Okay, but this is what my work has always been about. Okay, regardless of what package it's been wrapped up in, whether it's a course that I've run or coaching or certifications, it's about helping people know themselves deeply and intimately and doing something with that. Right? So I don't know if this is the Capricorn in me or what, but it's like I want people to discover and uncover and reconnect with the true self. And I want to see people paying that forward, doing something with it, whether that's in business, that's kind of typically been my thing. But even if that's in relationships with your family and your communities, like using that for the betterment to create that ripple effect of change in your little patch of the world. Right? That's what juices me. It's this kind of living inner alchemy. And alchemy is not just about kind of navel gazing and, doing all of the healing and doing all of the things. It's like, and then what? All right. That's the part that juices me. Okay. So all of this has kind of been woven into my work over the last 12 plus years. Even, as I said, even when I was in corporate, there were notes of this. Okay. I was leading big teams, working with a lot of people, very much involved in change and people development. Okay. So helping people be their true self is the thing. And so what I'm seeing, and I guess it's from this privilege of hindsight as well, and having worked with literally hundreds of people now and clocking up thousands and thousands of hours of work and experience in this particular space, is that the world around us at the moment, I see this in my client sessions and through discussions that I have with people in my community, that as the world's changing around us, okay, we're seeing all of these technological advancements, we're seeing all of these like crazy world leaders doing their thing, we're seeing all of this kind of division and polarity and all of this stuff. But it's like we're kind of teetering on the edge at the moment. And I've really felt this, particularly since the COVID era, okay, where we're sort of teetering on the edge of what some call the Kali Yuga, okay, which is this kind of turning of the wheel, this sort of age of darkness that we're in. Sometimes people call it the age of quarrel, okay? And how appropriate is that? It feels like everyone's just arguing with each other and no one is listening. As we enter this, we're kind of going into this void space at the moment. People are quarreling. There's some darkness. We're seeing real shadow starting to appear on the world stage. We're seeing this polarity and tribalism and all of the things, okay? clients are bringing that and essences and notes of that into our coaching practices too. But what I'm noticing is that despite that, it's like as that starts to just heighten and intensify, and as this crucible that's kind of almost like boiling the waters of the world, as that starts to get hotter and hotter and hotter, what we're noticing is that there's this little kind of small counterbalance that's starting to be restored. Have you noticed this? Have you noticed this little counterbalance? And that is people being drawn back to what makes us human. When we have AI, who I believe now is collectively more intelligent than all of the humans on Earth at the moment, or will shortly be, that when we have these kind of spiritual forces, whether you believe in that, but certainly whether we have AI sort of rising up, we're noticing that what's happening is people are just wanting to know what it's like to be human again. We see people, and I noticed this, my partner has teenage kids, and they're kind of at this point where they're like wanting to go back to like the 90s. They weren't even born in the 90s, but they're wanting to go and like purchase old TVs. They want to watch DVDs. They want to kind of disconnect and go offline, right? And it's like, what makes us human again? People want to come back to community and really discover their sense of purpose in this life. Have you noticed this? People are wanting to really ground, not everyone, by the way, but like I'm talking about 95% of people are caught up in the age of quarrel, right? But there's this 5%, and it's likely your coaching clients are in this 5%, are wanting to come back to this sense of meaning and humanity and community. Okay. And when I look at this, again, just by way of backstory about the coaching industry, because I know many of you are here because you're in the coaching or wellness industry in some way or shape or form. I've seen a lot of people come and go, all right? I've seen a lot of bad actors in the industry, and they eventually kind of fade away, thank God. I've seen a lot of fads come and go, a lot of marketing tactics, all of the things, all right? But the one thing that has withstood the test of time, and that's because I believe it's an ancient impulse. I'm going to come back to that in a moment. One thing that's withstood the test of time, despite all the changes in this industry, the changes in the world, okay, is that our clients are really desiring to make contact with something bigger than themselves. It's this call back to humanity and community, like I said, but I think it goes a little deeper than that. There's this ancient impulse. I'm going to share a bit more about this in a sec, but there's this ancient impulse that we all have, regardless of our background or culture or gender or whatever, is that we all have this desire, this impulse to make contact with the divine, to discover a sense of purpose and meaning in that, and to take the lessons and the challenges and all of the transformative periods that we've been through, and to use that as fuel for the next evolution, whether that's in business or love or life or whatever. But we're seeing this. We're seeing that this ancient impulse still beats beneath the surface, okay? And that ancient impulse is something that's been spoken about by mystics and psychologists and philosophers and even scientists across the ages, as this thing that's within the heart and within almost like the DNA of every person on earth. Whether we allow ourselves to feel it or not is a whole other thing. But if you look, for example, at what Carl Jung spoke about, the Swiss psychoanalyst, he spoke a lot about what he called the inherent religious function. Now, forget the word religious for a minute. You can replace that with spiritual. But what he was really talking about is that there is this nature of the psyche. We all have a psyche, okay, that's made up of our conscious and unconscious thoughts, all right? And actually, it's very sacred, all right? He described it as innate. It's unconscious. We have this drive and this desire, this sacred nature of the psyche that wants to encounter the divine. Likewise, there was a German philosopher called Rudolf Otto who spoke a lot about how this impulse emerges from this very special kind of non-rational part of the mind. And he coined a couple of terms which I love, that he spoke about kind of fascinate the average human, every human. And he spoke about this particular term, which was the mysterium fascinans, this fascinating, awe-inspiring mystery, how that really lives and pumps through our veins, alongside this thing he called the mysterium tremendum, the terrifying mystery of life and who we are and what our purpose is, okay? That we have this. This is something that unites us as humans. And likewise, even modern day scientific thinkers, okay, many of them actually suggest that we have this natural inclination towards meaning, towards myth and symbolism, that there is an evolutionary and an adaptive reason around that, okay? They've studied parts of the brain that correlate to this, etc. All of the things, okay? So the point is, this has been spoken about for many, many, many years. And if I look at those theories and that sort of literature and that psychological thought, that's great. But again, very pragmatic Capricorn, okay, is like, well, I see this in real time. I see this day to day. I see this with my clients' because my clients tell me about it, okay? Which is that right now in 2026, this is absolutely freaking playing out. This ancient impulse is starting to breathe again. This impulse to encounter the divine. It's being activated again. It's coming to life again. Have you noticed maybe even this within yourself? I know many of you have been on a spiritual path or a personal development path for many, many years, but maybe you're noticing this within yourself, that there's this call to go deeper or to approach things a little differently. Perhaps you're noticing that your sense of self or who you thought you were, maybe you're questioning that. Maybe there have been things that have happened where you're like, God, I thought I'd done that work. I thought I knew that part of me. What the hell's going on? All right, so yes, that impulse might have been conditioned out, as I said before. Some people don't allow themselves to feel it. All of the materialists and the atheists and everyone else that's out there, which is fine. All right, but many of us at our core, and most importantly, us and our clients, people who are looking for this work, we have this desire to know ourselves deeply and to make contact with the sacred psyche. Okay. And one of my favorite topics, sort of as it relates to this too, and it's just kind of coming to me because it's something that relates to this idea of knowing thyself, to know the sacred psyche, to follow that impulse. One of my favorite subjects, okay, little side story. One of my favorite subjects at school was ancient history. I don't know, do you guys love ancient history too? I freaking love it. I've been fascinated with it since I was a little kid. But when I studied it for my HSC, or my A levels, it's called in the UK, we did a deep dive into ancient Persia and ancient Greece in particular. And I had the most amazing ancient history teacher. His name was Mr. McLellan. Shout out if you're listening, Mr. McLellan, which I doubt you are, but anyway. He spoke about this story of Delphi, ancient Delphi. Curious to know if you know this story, by the way. But ancient Delphi is situated in Greece. Okay, and today it's a major archaeological site. All right, there's a township associated with it. It's situated on a mountain. It's called Mount Parnassus. Okay, and it's very, very famous for the Temple of Apollo. I've actually been there on one of my travels to Greece. I made the journey to visit Delphi and to visit the Temple of Apollo, which was an incredible experience. Okay. But the Temple of Apollo was very, very special. Obviously, it's just rubble today. Very, very special because this is where, thousands of years ago, all of the pilgrims and even royalty and ancient warriors, they would make the pilgrimage to Delphi, specifically to the Temple of Apollo, to seek prophecies from the Pythia. And the Pythia was essentially the high priestess that worked within the temple of Apollo at the time. And so they would go there before battles and things and try and get some advice and some guidance and all of the things. But one of the most important parts of the story, and I promise this has a point, is as you would cross the threshold into the forecourt of the temple of Apollo, there was inscribed, so imagine this, you're walking across the beautiful, incredible temple forecourt, and then inscribed above you was almost like a sign that said, "Know thyself." Or it was written, "Noti Sauton," okay, which means know thyself. And this was foundational. As people cross this threshold through the temple in to visit the high priestess, there was this sign that said, "Know yourself." Right? Isn't there some irony in that as well, right? They're kind of going to seek counsel and they're going to seek prophecies, but the real request is that you know yourself. Okay. And what that really means is that as you cross and as you meet with the divine, as you really make contact with the divine, what's important is that you understand your limitations, you understand your mortality, your humanity. And often that sits in direct contrast, obviously, with the divine. But you have to bring it all with you as you meet the divine. And so this is kind of this story, I think, just really brings to life this instinct, okay? This instinct to make contact with the divine, but to do that and to do that earnestly, you need to know your limitations. You need to understand your shadows. You need to understand the limitations of your humanity, our little ego minds and our little worlds that we live in as we make contact with this thing that's bigger than us. And my instinct is, I promise I'm going somewhere with this, but my instinct is that archetypally, that story, that pilgrimage, that symbol or sacred act of visiting the priestess in the temple is still there to this day, and it's being reactivated, particularly now. We crave it. Even though the temples are no longer in existence, they're all rubble, okay? You go visit them on your next trip to Greece, all right? Beautiful, incredible, spiritually profound places. But even though they no longer exist, there is still this call to know thyself and to bring our mortality into contact with the divine. People want this. That spiritual function is activating. So I want to just take a little pause there, all right? Pause this podcast if you need to and sit with that image. Imagine yourself going on this pilgrimage, okay, crossing the forecourt of this temple to meet with the Pythia, the high priestess at the temple of Apollo. And the myth said that she would sit on a three-legged chair and she would counsel and deliver prophecies to whoever came to see her. Now, what I really believe is that within each of us is the high priestess. Okay, and I'm not talking about in our capacity as coaches that people somehow come to us as a high priestess. I think that's very egocentric. What I'm saying is our job as coaches is to support people in encountering and making contact with the high priestess within themselves. Okay? That's really important. And to also hold that tension of their limitations at the same time. Okay? That's what I believe we're here to do. This is what I believe we're being called to do as coaches, particularly depth coaches, those who are more spiritually or psycho-spiritually inclined. That's the invitation. And if we're to jump ahead to the modern day, all right, let's talk about some facts now as well as the mythology. If we look at the modern day, all right, the spiritual and holistic services market, let's talk about it because life coaching is in there. Personal development is part of this market. It is growing. People say to me on discovery calls all the time, like, oh, but I don't know, I've heard that the coaching industry is shrinking. No, it's not. It's growing faster than it's ever grown. It has changed, but it's absolutely growing. So it's valued, the spiritual holistic services market is valued at just under 400 billion, like billion with a B, US dollars currently. And it's expected to almost double by 2035, right? And so there's some global industry analysis. I can put that into the show notes if you're really interested in doing the nerdy, geeky stuff like I do after the podcast. But so there's some industry analysis there. And I share this only because demand is growing, guys. And we see that through the statistics. We see that through what I believe is this resuscitation of this ancient impulse, because I feel that. You feel that probably in your coaching practice as well. Perhaps you feel that in your soul, just as an individual as well. So demand is growing, but people are looking for the right kind of support. The Wild West days, thank God, of the coaching industry are over, where anyone can call themselves a coach and it's all like, hey, you know, I'm just doing what my coach told me to do, and then I'm going to train another coach to do what there's no pyramid scheme here. People are like, you know, that was one of the criticisms of the coaching industry, wasn't it? That there are a few bad actors that basically just said, no, you just kind of got to copy what I do. And look, there's wisdom in that, okay? Everyone's got to start somewhere. Everyone's got to try and find that momentum any way they can. And what's happening now is that people are being called to really step into their own power, their own identity as coaches, and to be really freaking good at what they do. Okay, it's no longer enough to just kind of sail by, right? Or to just hope and pray. You got to be good at what you do, right? People are more into their due diligence than ever before. Thank goodness, it's a great thing. People want to read the reviews. They want to know that you've had the right training, all of that, okay? And no piece of paper, okay? No piece of paper is ever going to replace real world and lived experience, but the two need to coexist together, and it's more important than ever before. Okay, so the demand is growing in the industry. And when you look at this, okay, you look at some of the drivers behind it. There's the ancient impulse, as I said before, totally believe that's being reactivated, and stress and burnout, all-time high, okay? More mental health and well-being awareness is out there as well, including in some corporates and organizations too. People are starting to pay attention more to mental health and well-being. Some take it more seriously than others. Some just give it lip service. But regardless, the message is getting out there. This is important stuff. There are also, and we live in the age of influencers, which is a great thing. You know, it's like, I'm always still really surprised when people criticize influencers and those who are building online businesses as solopreneurs, because number one, it is such a legitimate career path these days. You know, you don't have to do the whole typical, oh, I'm going to go bust my gut and get into $100,000 of university debt and do a degree that I'll never use anymore to feel legitimized. You can go and you can build a business and become an entrepreneur, and that is totally legitimate if you are willing, if you have the work ethic to do that, all right? And you have the vision and purpose and that kind of push to do that, all right? So more influencers are in this space, and love them or hate them, but they're raising awareness. They're raising awareness of the importance of well-being and wellness and mental health, and all of those sorts of things. That digital accessibility is also there as part of that. And like I said before, this industry is growing because of the polarization, I believe. Polarization and disruption on the world stage. The collective shadow is on full display. People are asking big questions about their life, what they stand for. We also have, I believe, this post-pandemic kind of mindset shift too, where people were really challenged and frankly traumatized during those times. Okay? Regardless of wherever you stood in terms of your personal views on vaccines and lockdowns, and I don't really care. But at the end of the day, everyone has their own version of some kind of trauma they went through during those years. All right, relationships broke down. We saw people losing jobs. We saw people feeling really angry and upset. We saw people feeling scared. Perhaps we were feeling scared. But what that did was it made people ask big questions about their life. And so it's all of these drivers, you know, everything from the ancient impulse through to the increase in stress and burnout and polarization, that I believe is really driving demand in this industry right now. Okay. So I just kind of, again, there's a lot of information there. And so I want you to come back to this episode. It feels like it's, you know, I didn't have a well drafted plan coming into this episode today, but this feels like a really important episode. And so if it goes a little longer than usual, I'm okay with that. You know, you can always come back and pause it and do whatever, but I'm on a roll. And so I'm going to keep going. Okay. So if you're with me, let's keep going into part two, because what I want to do is bring this down into what does this mean for us as coaches now? All right. Because we've spoken about the mythology, we've spoken about the ancient impulse and all the juicy things, we've spoken about the industry, we've spoken about what's driving growth in the industry. So what the hell does that mean for us as individual coaches running a solo business, or people who desire to do that? I know there are a lot of you in my audience who don't yet have a business either, which is cool. All right, so what's happening right now, and we see this in our practice, is that people are starting to meet something bigger than themselves. Okay, they're starting to, you're like, when you sort of think about it, it's sort of like, well, there's all this big stuff that's going on around me. You know, I'm feeling like maybe I'm less in control of my feelings of overwhelm, or I'm feeling like the pressures and the kind of the disruption and polarization happening around me is feeling really unbearable at the moment. So they're meeting these bigger factors, and they're meeting something bigger than themselves. And when you think about it, this is what spirituality is, isn't it? Spirituality, in the truest sense, is not about religion necessarily. And it's not about like feeling blissed out or bypassing or feeling like it's all love and light, or even just feeling good. Spirituality is actually about meeting the self through transformation, through encountering something bigger than us, being stretched in our consciousness. And so right now, our human ego, little human egos in our little worlds that we've created, right? We're being invited into that relationship with something bigger than ourselves, just like at Delphi, okay? Just like those pilgrims bringing their limitations and all of their little ego minds and ego problems and dramas, okay? Having to meet something bigger than them through the oracle at the time. If we look at that metaphor, metaphorically, right? That's what's happening now. The bigger forces that we're meeting are, yes, of course, what's happening in and around the world at large, but also this bigness. You know, we're meeting these bigger forces around, you know, questioning our true identity. That's big. That's a big thing to think about. What's our meaning? What's our purpose and direction in life? That's a big thing that people are encountering. Questions of love as well. That's big. We're also noticing people, and we do this too, we're probably noticing this in ourselves, but we're meeting these unconscious and deeply symbolic experiences. The amount of clients that I'm talking to that are having these incredibly vivid dreams and synchronicities right now, patterns, and people noticing shadows that they can't quite grasp, they can't quite make sense of, or even integrate or shake. Okay, this sense that there is a next level calling. All of these factors, these are bigger forces that people are grappling with right now. So anyone who suggests that the coaching industry has run its course is dead wrong. And I'm not just hypothesizing here, I'm seeing the proof in my own business, my client's business, the statistics I shared earlier. We are growing people. And during these times, you know, when you think about the world at the moment and the craziness that we're witnessing, and when we sort of start to see these kind of people grappling with questions of purpose and direction, when people typically have gone through big times of transformation, I guess is what I'm saying, is that usually there are these other stabilizing forces operating in the background of society, aren't there? Like, you think about it, there's been governments that we can rely on, there's religion, capitalism, even patriarchy, you know, in some weird, crazy sense. In the past, we've been able to rely on that. There's something to cling to, even when everything feels like it's shifting and changing all around us. But those old systems, government, religion, capitalism, patriarchy, they're crumbling. So people don't have anything to hold on to anymore, do they? so I'm sharing this because I want this to be something that you feel in your bones, All right. These old systems are crumbling. And so what's happening as they crumble, people are turning to the old ways. And there are some people, as I said, probably 95%, okay, turn to tribalism. They're splitting. There's us versus them. There's unconsciousness. Those are not your people as coaches. The amount of coaches I see trying to convert the people who are completely unconscious and have no desire to change, please don't do that. I see that all the time. They're not your people. You're here to work with the 5% who are awake and who are listening for you. The people who are becoming conscious and awake to it all. These are your people, regardless of your niche. These are the people that are ready. They've got their eyes open. They're willing to see what's next. They're coachable. They're open. These are your people, okay? Really important. Because it's these people, your people, these are the ones that are going through a type of awakening, all right, and a reorganization. They're turning within. They're wanting to know themselves better, okay, which is typically why they're looking for a coach or some other kind of support. They want to understand what drives them. They want to understand what's limiting them. They're reorganizing like the big caterpillar in the cocoon, all right? They're reorganizing from the inside out, but there's a willingness there. And so it's this kind of reorganization, it can cause some confusion and some hunger and pain and a bit of dullness or even like a real pull in our clients' lives as they're sort of in the cocoon, all right, and they're transforming. But that's ultimately why they're turning to coaching, right, and to spiritual and wellness services generally. But when we look at the coaching space, and I want you to kind of listen to this really, I really want you to hear this, okay? The problem is that the coaching space, it's really important. The coaching space has become so performance-based, okay? How to set better goals, all right? How to optimize your goals, how to set smart goals, all right? Very surface level, maybe even some ego polishing, all right? And some personality improvement. The thing is, your personality isn't your true self, okay? So you can say that you know yourself, and, oh, I know I'm an introvert, and I know I'm this, this, and this, and I'm going to be quite outspoken. All of that's your personality. None of that's who you really are, okay? And so most modern day coaching is about polishing up the personality, all right? Making you feel like you're optimizing your performance, okay? Setting some cool goals for yourself and then berating yourself when you don't hit them, frankly. All right, so that's what modern day coaching has typically become. And on the flip side, if we look at spirituality, if we look at modern day New Age movement, or a lot of, obviously I'm generalizing here. Of course, there are some incredible coaching businesses and spiritual businesses in amongst this. But spirituality generally these days has become like sound bites on bloomin' Instagram, okay? It's become an aesthetic. It's become soothing and idealistic and even a little bit bypassy. All right, it's about, hey, come and do your 500th ayahuasca ceremony, but don't integrate any of it, right? So spirituality has become a bit of an aesthetic, all right? Likewise, I want to look at psychology, okay? This is really important, and I can say this, I believe, as a psychologist myself. Psychology and the science of psychology, which is exactly what it's so desperate to be seen as, has become very clinical, very behavioral focused, academic and hierarchical. That's the truth, all right? Psychology has become so desperate to be taken seriously as a science over the last 100 years that it's lost its soul, okay? And there's this kind of, if we look at these three things, psychology, where that's gone, spirituality and coaching as it exists, there's this gap. Like, where the hell do people go to the temple? Okay? Where do they go to the temple these days? None of those modalities really prepare people for the loss of old identities before new ones form. No one is talking about how do we bring someone into contact with their true self. None of these modalities prepare people for encountering parts of the self that disrupt their perfectly curated self-image. None of these modalities talk about liminal spaces and these periods of unknowing that people go through before preceding real change. No? Get it? None of these talk about any of that. None of these talk about becoming someone that you didn't consciously set out to be, and then by the time you're 45, you wake up, you rub your eyes, and you're like, where the hell is my life gone? Who the hell am I? No one's talking about that. No one's talking about how to hold opposing truths at the same time and how inner conflict can't just be resolved with insight or behavioral change. No one is talking. There is this gap that's wide open right now. And ironically, this is the gap that people need filling. Got it? And this, if you're still listening to this is your spiritual invitation as a coach. Not to become a wannabe therapist, not to be some kind of, jacked up kind of high performance coach who works with people on setting some like shit hot goals. No one cares about that. People are searching for meaning right now. They want to activate their potential. I know I need to bring it down because I can feel myself getting a bit like, but it's like people, they're ready for real transformation. They're expanding in their consciousness. These are the times that we're in. Not everybody, that 5%, right? But hey, 5% of 8 billion people on the planet, that's a freaking huge market. All right? They're waking up. They want to understand their limitations. They want to understand why they keep meeting the same a-hole in a different body when they're out there dating and trying to get into a relationship. They want to understand why they keep getting in their own way, why they keep attracting, quote unquote, attracting the same thing into their lives. Truly, this is what people are after. Got it? And so we're going through yet another cycle of awakening. So many of us who have been on a spiritual path, in my lifetime, I know a lot of people woke up around 2001, also 2012, okay, which is when I started my spiritual awakening back in 2012, is when I kind of woke up. Many people, I believe, are going through it now as well. And so the opportunity here, the calling, all right, the calling is for coaches, particularly those who consider themselves depth coaches, people who want to work at depth, all right, with people. This is the calling of the times, all right? There is a whole space here for you to come in and occupy and to stand out and, more importantly, to really help people and to create an incredible, freaking abundant business doing so. I'm just going to be real with you guys, okay? Because depth coaching, really, when we think about it, depth coaching continues a very, very long spiritual tradition, starting with the Pythia and the Oracle of Apollo, the Temple of Apollo, okay, in Delphi, right through to guides and other priestesses and soul workers, okay? Even now, like modern depth psychologists, there's like a whole lineage here, all right? There's a whole continuum that we get to carry on as depth practitioners. As a depth coach, it's about going deeper, obviously, clues in the title, but it's about providing that supportive space for the unconscious and the symbolic life of the psyche to emerge, all right? Because here's what I think is really important to remember. Not everything that shapes us is conscious. We know that, right? We know that we have unconscious forces, we have symbolic forces and shadow forces and collective forces that shape us. They're not always conscious. But likewise, not everything that limits us is clinical or pathological. Not everything that limits us needs working through at the level of therapy or counseling, for example. Sometimes there are things at depth that come up that require a spiritual conversation, that require a conversation that's more around understanding your identity. It's not about unpicking your trauma, okay, or working through mental health stuff. That's firmly within the domain of therapy, and we freaking need therapists doing that work. But what happens after that? What happens when people are ready to move forward and ready to, yeah, like understand who they really are, what their next chapter looks like? That's not necessarily a therapeutic discussion. It's not necessarily a discussion that you have with your guru either. And it's not necessarily a discussion that you have with your high performance freaking coach. It's about, well, how can I speak? Who do I speak to about that? Okay. And so again, I'm focusing on this to make a point right now, because as a depth coach, you're here to provide that space. It's for that symbolic life of the psyche to emerge, that unconscious life to emerge, to really help people discover their true selves, the parts of themselves that perhaps they've never had any contact with before, their hidden potential. We do a lot of work, particularly in the Psychodynamic Coach Academy, around contacting the true self, those untapped little nuggets of potential and wisdom that lay within the recesses of one's subconscious. How do we get in touch with that stuff? That's the good stuff, right? And so all of that really is about being in service of the client's forward-focused spiritual growth. This is, I believe, the new standard in coaching. Great, there's always going to be a space, for the bro coaches and the subconscious recoding hackers and the people that want to optimize your goals and, jump up and down and say millions of affirmations. And, there's always a space for that. There's always going to be people who move to that. That's great. But if you're in a space where you're ready to help people go deeper, okay, to answer those questions of, I don't know who I am anymore. What used to work doesn't really work anymore. I feel like I'm kind of questioning everything and my purpose. Like, who am I now? So many people go through this, by the way, at midlife, kind of, I'd say 30s, 40s, of course, into 50s as well. But there's a lot of people that are feeling this very real call back to their true self. And this is what I'm trying to articulate through this podcast, that there are so many factors around why I believe that's happening, and that you should feel so enthusiastic and heartened as a coach or a new coach or an aspiring coach, because these are the sorts of questions that you have the privilege of helping people find the answers to, not because you've got the answers, okay? You're not the Oracle of Delphi, right? But you are here to help people contact their own oracle, their own way, their own inner knowing. And we have an incredible toolkit that enables you to have those sorts of and those levels of conversations in the Psychodynamic Coach Academy, which I'll tell you a little bit more about towards the end for those who feel called. But the other really important thing I want to sort of say and start to bring this to a close around is that you'll notice I've shared throughout this episode, it's not just about the work we're doing with our clients. It's not just all about our clients, okay? We are a living, breathing part of this journey with our clients, and we obviously have a living, breathing role to play in our own journey. Depth coaches asks something very important of us as the coach. And that is this understanding that you can't guide a client into the unknown if you are afraid of the dark, or if you can't see in the dark, or don't have the right tools to support them and shine the light through the dark. So that's really important, okay? Because sometimes people think, well, if I just get a certification, okay, then I'm going to feel ready. Okay, I'm going to feel ready. I've got the boxes ticked. I can go, I can work with people, I can do all of the things. But this is as much about allowing yourself to be shaped by the work, increasing your capacity as a coach to hold people through their journey, through their discomfort, because guess what? That's going to be uncomfortable as hell for you too. So therefore, you have to, if you aspire to be a depth coach, you must expand your capacity for discomfort. You have to allow yourself to meet your own shadow as it's activated, and it will be activated. Maybe you feel like you've done all the shadow work and, that's fine. And there's layers to that. I've been doing this work since 2012, and I always meet new parts of myself. So anyone who comes into this space thinking, I know all of this already, you're not ready to be a depth coach. Okay, because your ego is still tripping you up. Okay. You got to relinquish your ego. This work requires you to just relinquish it a little. Our egos are important. Okay. And they can trip us up if we feel like we know everything already. So you got to really relinquish that. And you've got to develop an identity, which means doing your own work. You've got to develop an identity that's strong enough to hold someone else's becoming. Really think about that. You got to have a strong enough identity. You got to know who you are. You got to know your edges, your boundaries. You have to have a big enough container to hold someone else's becoming as a coach. Okay. This isn't for people who are, kind of like, oh, so 1 foot in, 1 foot out, and then, bottle it when things get too hard. Okay. It's for people who are strong enough to hold this work. And I want to be really clear about that. It's for people who are flexible. Okay. You got to be flexible in this. You got to be open-hearted. You got to be curious. You got to be humble, and you got to be strong. It's these opposites, right? You must be willing to be continually shaped and refined by the work yourself. Anyone who comes onto a discovery call with me will know that one of the questions that I always ask is about this capacity for them to be shaped and refined by the work themselves. Okay, so be prepared for that if you book a consult call with me about the upcoming cohort of the Coach Academy, because having a humility and an open heart and an open mind to go on this journey is not just vital for the certification and trainings and work that I do with people, but it's really important for you as a coach as you start your business and work with clients too. You're not here to manage or direct or to tell your clients. You're here to support them on their journey. And that means checking your ego, checking your sense of, oh, I know better. Well, I'm the coach. Any power control dynamics that might subtly be playing out in your energetic field, we've got to check those, okay? And that's a lot of that sort of stuff, some of the subtle dynamics that we work with as well, particularly in the PCA. But this is, I just want to bring it to life around what it really means to be a depth coach, because I know that so many of you feel that call, that you want to work at the level of identity and purpose and meaning and the unconscious and the shadow and all of these juicy parts, the energetic intelligence that shapes us as well, the symbolic and the abstract, the imaginal life, all of that stuff we cover. But the question is how to also do that with integrity, okay? And that's where psychodynamic coaching comes in. And really, what I would say is if you're feeling the call is around depth coaching, okay, and working at that level, but you need a path within that call, right? Because otherwise, if you just feel called, it's like, oh, I've got this calling, and it feels a bit nebulous, right? It's like, well, what does that actually look like in practice? So practical Capricorn, okay, is going to come in and say, hey, this is a path that you can choose to walk. This is a path that I've designed, that I've created after so many years now, 20 plus years of experience, 30 years. I don't know. How old am I? 45. Many years, okay, of doing this work. Having a framework, having a clear path, but also having a very clear ethical and well-defined scope is also very important, okay? And it's something that I take very, very seriously, but psychodynamic coaching comes in with that clear coaching framework. It comes in with professional standards. It comes in with accreditation, all the things that your clients are going to be looking for. But also it helps you with things like boundaries and discernment, containment, not overstepping, what it means to be trauma-informed, okay? It allows you to be shaped by the work itself whilst also having a very clear cognizance of these other scopes and boundaries and things like that too, all right? So for those who are interested We do have our upcoming cohort that's starting on the 30th of March. We're almost half full already through our pre-sale, but doors are opening this week. And so what I would invite you to do is definitely check out the psychodynamiccoachinginstitute.com. You can just head over to our website. There's more information on there about our accredited coach certification. If you're looking to train as a depth coach, specifically as a psychodynamic coach, you're welcome to do that. But allow me to just kind of bring it to life a little bit, because sometimes people ask me, what is psychodynamic coaching? And it's a really good question, because what it is all about, it's about the clues in the word dynamic, all right? It's about helping the client understand the dynamic and conflicting forces of the psyche. So if we think about the aim of individuation, Carl Jung spoke about individuation, that journey to becoming the true self. That's there as a goal. But in order to get to the true self, we all know that there are parts of us that are in conflict with one another. There are shadow parts, there are ego parts, there's unconscious programming, there is emotional intelligence that's there, and emotional wisdom and somatic wisdom as well. There's all this stuff that can sometimes feel like it's in conflict with one another. Now, a good example is to think about how we might say we want a goal. Okay, I want to get to this goal. And we're there and we're feeling really excited and we want to build the momentum. But then there's another secret part of us that's like got one foot on the brake. And it's this kind of push-pull. That's psychodynamic tension. So a lot of this is about working with that hidden wisdom of the personal unconscious to support clients in achieving real-time goals, okay? A lot of the way we do that is through engaging shadow, engaging projection, and that inner conflict as meaningful signals that something is changing. Something requires integration. But it also includes, and this is not typically within the domain of psychodynamics, but we also do a lot of somatic work as well, because how can we not? Working with the body's instinctive responses and intuitive wisdom and intelligence is a huge part of helping people achieve integration and ultimately working towards unlocking that sense of the true self. All right, so really, this work is deeply embedded in Jung's understanding of individuation and the emergence of the true self. Psychodynamics, as a field of psychology, is informed by many different thinkers and practitioners, and there's a lot of people that have contributed to that field of knowledge, but our lineage within that is Carl Jung. So very much a Jungian lineage and a Jungian lens that we take and apply to this work, which is beautiful when it comes to coaching. His model of the psyche is very grounded, it's very spiritually intelligent work, and it's one that lends itself beautifully to a coaching model as well, all right? Because remember, and I think this is important too, clients don't want to set better goals, all right? They don't want better behavior necessarily. They want to become their true self. They want peace. They want that inner wisdom. They want to feel grounded. They want to feel like they have the capacity to choose better in relationships without being triggered or without repeating the same cycles over and over again. And that's what psychodynamic coaching really helps them do. And so, again, I would put the call to action out there. If you're interested in understanding more, we are running an early bird promotion throughout February for our upcoming cohort, which starts on the 30th of March. So don't delay. As I said, we're almost half full at the moment. And really, I think just really quick fire, this is for you. It's for coaches they're already coaching, or it's for people who want to start a coaching business that just feel called to work beneath the surface. You sense that transformation's more than just mindset tips and tricks or habits and things, okay? You are really someone who notices that emotional depth or shadow material is something that draws you. You want to make a difference in a way that feels very meaningful, okay? Not just it's not all just about hacks and productivity, okay? But it's also for you if you genuinely want that internationally accredited coach training and certification as well. And most importantly, you're willing to show up and allow yourself to be shaped by the work. Okay, if depth keeps finding you, if it's been part of your journey, then it's probably a good sign that you're drawn to being a depth coach. So, as I said, check out our institute. It will be all kind of hooked up around this episode of the podcast, but go to the URL Psychodynamic Coaching Institute, all one word.com, and check out all of the details there. There's an FAQ section. All of our pricing is listed and it's all transparent. We have a couple of payment plans that you can choose from too. And so that's my plug for the Psychodynamic Coaching Academy, okay? But really, go back and listen to this episode because there's a lot of information I shared there about why depth coaching is a spiritual invitation. There is this ancient waking up of that spiritual impulse. Okay, that's really becoming alive. We're noticing that the world stage is really shaking things up and exposing the collective shadow. We're seeing the coaching industry and the spiritual and wellness space as well growing rapidly for all of those reasons and drivers that I shared before too. And we're seeing that there is this gap that's wide open for people who are willing to fill it, who are willing to work with people at depth, not in a clinical capacity or a therapeutic capacity, but in the capacity that is about helping people contact that sense of true self, true meaning and identity, how to move forward with great momentum in their lives, to find that inner peace, okay, helping people make that contact with their own sense of the divine as well. So there is a whole space here that is calling for people like you, if this is something that's really like, oh yeah, like this just juices me, please definitely check out the URL and book a call with me as well if you're interested in the upcoming round. I do offer a 60-minute consultation calls. I like to offer a very generous time period there so we can have the chance to talk. We can discern together if it feels like the right step for you too. I can share more information about some of the logistics and practicalities if you're interested in that also. And you and I can have a discussion about your readiness and whether it's the right fit, all of those sorts of things. Okay, so all of the links to do that will be on the website. Definitely do that sooner rather than later. As I said, we typically always fill up and we're almost half full at the moment too. But for those of you who do manage to get in, we have the early bird promotion, as I said, throughout February. We've got the chance to save over $1,500 on your tuition as well. We also have an extended 10-part payment plan as well for people, all interest-free. So check out the website, okay? Reach out if you've got questions or book a call with me is probably your best bet, and we can take it from there. But regardless of what you choose, if this is where I leave you, I hope you found some real value in this episode today. It feels like it's been one that's been kind of bubbling away, as I said, for the last little while. And hopefully you felt that I found that clarity as we went through as well, all right? And so remember, that's the micro lesson in this too, is to just do before it feels polished, do before it feels perfect. Just trust that clarity will come in the doing and in the being, in the speaking, okay? And let that just be a little micro lesson for you too, okay? We all need that little reminder from time to time, okay? So take care. Until next time, have an incredible rest of your week. We'll talk soon.